Hello everyone. Today's video is about the optimal diet to follow if one is dealing with SIBO, and then sort of an addendum question about best diet to follow if one is underweight, and what's the best SIBO diet to follow. As per usual, nothing I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. If you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. Also, just before jumping into the video, sometimes there are occasional comments about folks having a hard time hearing the audio on my videos, so I have tried making an adjustment. So if you wouldn't mind letting me know in the comment section whether you can hear my audio well, I'd appreciate it, as I'm trying to tweak it for folks, and anyways, been struggling with this on and off for some folks for years, so please let me know. So without further ado, here's the video, or here's the topic for today. So the question says, I have a follow-up question. I'd asked another question previously. Do you have a preference for which SIBO diet to follow? I am prone to being underweight and need some carbs for energy. I noticed that the Cedars-Sinai low fermentation diet still includes white rice, potatoes, etc., whereas others completely cut out carbs. Do you know if it is still possible to see improvements while keeping some carbs in the diet? Also, should the diet be long-term, or is it possible to transition back to a regular diet? So good questions in there. And yeah, one of the biggest challenges is putting folks who are underweight or are prone to losing weight on a good anti-SIBO diet. Sometimes the reason that they are underweight is because of SIBO, so it becomes a bit of a rock and a hard place to some extent, but it's a surmountable obstacle. So generally speaking, the best diet for SIBO, or I should say, well, the best diet for SIBO is the one that works the best for the individual patient. But getting into more specifics than that, the diet that I put most of my patients on who are dealing with SIBO is a paleo diet. Now, a paleo diet is a broad term, so there's not a one-size-fits-all description there, but basically a paleo diet, by my definition, is a diet that is very low in complex carbohydrates and avoids certain and basically avoids refined sugar as well. So, cutting out things like grains and starchy vegetables, refined sugar, high fructose corn syrup, that type of thing. And I'll oftentimes recommend that my patients minimize their intake of dairy products with the exception of butter, because so many of my patients are sensitive to dairy. So most of my patients can get away with a diet like that. But some patients need more than that. Some of them do better following a low FODMAP diet. Now, a lot of my patients come in, a number of my patients have come in already on a low FODMAP diet. So I ask them, well, how's this working for you? And if they say, yeah, it's working really, really well, but it's really restrictive and I'm still not, 100%, as the question here indicated, there are some, like say the Cedars-Sinai low fermentation diet, which sounds like to my understanding, it's basically a low FODMAPS diet. Yes, there are still some complex carbs allowed on there. And sometimes that is the limiting factor that, kind of prevents a diet like that from being wholly successful for treating SIBO. With that being said, circling back there, so what I usually do is start my patients on the paleo diet, such as I described it, and then if we're still not seeing the results we're looking for, or patients not getting better as quickly as we'd like, or they're feeling a lot better, but they're still finding like, I'm still kind of getting gassy and bloated here and there, then what I'll ask them to do is take a look at the low FODMAP diet and see if they're eating any high FODMAP foods. And if they are, then I will ask them to let me know, well, of these foods, which ones are you eating really regularly? If they say, I eat one apple a month, well, apples are high in FODMAPs, but if it's one apple a month, that's probably not the culprit. Whereas if they say, well, I'm eating sweet potato, every single day, it's like, well, maybe it's the sweet potato because of the polyols that are in there, or they're eating broccoli or something like that. So I'll ask them to take a look at the low FODMAP food list, and if they're eating a lot of those, then ask them to cut out or minimize some of the foods they're eating on a really regular basis. So it's kind of like a hybrid paleo low FODMAP combo. But it's quite rare that I'll ask patients to go on a full low FODMAP diet / low fermentation diet, because I find that in a lot of cases when patients are on a low FODMAP diet and they say, yeah, this is helping, they're usually able to phase back in a bunch of those higher FODMAP foods with no problem at all. So it's kind of unnecessarily strict in a lot of cases in my experience. Now, I have had a handful of patients where they find, yes, every single food on that low FODMAP diet will cause them to flare. So there are exceptions to what I'm saying, but oftentimes a hybrid of paleo diet will usually do the trick for most folks. Sometimes we do need to get into a hybrid paleo low FODMAP diet. There are some patients where that's still not enough and they need to go full carnivore or modified keto or low lectin / autoimmune paleo, and it does get really quite a bit more difficult for some patients. So as I said at the start of the video, the best diet is the one that works the best for the individual patient, but that's what works for the majority of my patients. Now, the question here about if somebody is underweight or prone to losing weight too easily, that's where we have to start making some concessions because we don't want underweightness to get exacerbated or to be induced. So in those cases, what I'll usually recommend is that my patients follow the paleo diet, such as I described it, but then say you can go fill your boots with white rice and sweet potato, because white rice and sweet potato tend to be, in my experience, the least problematic complex carb / higher FODMAP food. I mean, white rice is low FODMAP, but sweet potato is high FODMAP, to my understanding. So those are usually very rare. It's very rare that they cause problems for patients. There are some patients where they cause problems for, absolutely, but I find that that's usually fine. So if patients are sticking with their white rice, not brown rice, because that's just begging for fermentation in the gut. That bran is going to really hold things back. But white rice, to my understanding, is generally digested and absorbed so quickly it doesn't linger in the small intestine for very long. And then I just find sweet potatoes usually quite well tolerated. I guess maybe those polyols just aren't that big of a deal for fermentation. I don't know, but clinically, it's rare that those foods are a problem. So we usually keep those in there, and it's oftentimes just fine. And then the patients are able to still keep up their weight by consuming those carbs. The question of can you still see improvements while keeping carbs in the diet? Absolutely, yes. I have patients who don't follow the dietary recommendations that I make at all. They just go on the antimicrobials and they get rid of their SIBO. Now, there are patients where if they don't modify their diet, they can't get rid of their SIBO, but we'll still see improvements. I don't know if I've had a case where we haven't seen at least some improvement, even if they're only making minimal dietary changes, as long as they're taking their antimicrobials. Now, of course, if there's someone who's like really sensitive to gluten, or they're just like, oh, I'm a sugaraholic, and I'm just eating candy and junk food and drinking pop and soda like all the time and all that, like maybe they're not going to get better at all. But if patients are at the very least like, okay, I'm going to eat healthy, but I can't seem to like give up my gluten, or like I can't seem to be like I still need my gluten-free bread or something like that, I still see improvements in almost every case. We might not get everybody all the way to the finish line if they don't tweak their diet, but many folks still get to the finish line even without tweaking their diet nearly to the full extent. And then the last question here is, should the diet be long-term, or is it possible to transition back to a regular diet? So that one really varies. I've had many patients where we treat SIBO or LIBO or yeast or parasites or whatever it is, all of the above in some cases, and the patients are able to go back to a non-paleo, non-low FODMAP, whatever diet. Like they can pretty much go back to eating what they want. Sometimes I would say in a majority of cases, actually, with the exception of gluten, maybe dairy, maybe refined sugar. They can oftentimes go back to eating those types of food to some extent, but will oftentimes say, like, I just don't feel as good when I'm eating those foods from time to if I eat those foods from time to time, maybe it's okay, but if I eat them regularly, I do start to feel not as well. So patients will usually start self-censoring and say, like, yeah, if I can eat gluten like once a week, a couple times a week, or even once a month, like I'm happy with that. I'll have it for my, whatever, special occasions, that kind of thing. I've seen that in many cases, but I have also had many cases where patients do need to sustain at least some semblance of a paleo diet, or maybe keeping some of those higher FODMAP foods down to more of a minimum in order to feel as good as possible moving forward. A lot of patients will kind of make the decision to say, like, yeah, I do feel the best when I follow paleo, but when work is busy, life is busy, I was on vacation, whatever, I let my hair down, and I don't feel as good, but it's a trade-off. And then, over time, maybe they'll start to gradually just try to keep those foods out of their diet more and more. Speaking from my own personal experience, I've been following a very healthy diet for a long time, but we used to, like, years and years ago, like, we'd have our, like, just, regular gluten, dairy, whatever, pizza nights and things like that. I was busy with young kids and this, that, and the other thing. And it's just like, I never feel that great afterwards. And it just got to the point where it's like, it didn't feel awful, not nearly to the extent when I had terrible digestive issues back in my late teens, which drove me into naturopathic medicine in the first place. So blessing in disguise. Just be like, I just feel kind of sluggish, feel like, my motivation would like go down the tubes after eating a bunch of pizza, that kind of thing. It just got to the point where it's like, just not worth it. Like, I just like feeling good all the time. So then I eat really well all the time. And it's just not worth the trade-off for me. But everybody has to make their own decisions. I also need to practice what I preach because I do this for a living. So I'm motivated from that perspective too. Nobody maybe people don't want to work with a naturopathic doctor who doesn't appear to be very healthy, so I try to stay at a very high level of good health, and thankful for that. Anyways, going off on a tangent there. If you wouldn't mind taking a quick moment to please like, share, subscribe, and or post a quick comment on the video, I would really appreciate it. So thanks in advance for taking a second to do that. Thank you to the person who asked these questions, very good questions. And if there's any questions or comments on this topic or anything else, please post in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer as soon as I can.